Well, tomatoes are one of the favorite food crops of home gardeners, and while they provide a bountiful harvest, they have their own set of problems. And with us today is Betsy Hudgins. She is the plant disease diagnostician here at OSU, and she's going to tell us some of those problems that can affect tomatoes. And Betsy, thanks for coming out today.
You're welcome.
Well, Betsy, first, what kinds of problems affect tomato leaves?
I would say that diseases are probably one of the main problems that we see on leaves, and I do have a sample down here. What we can see on these leaves are some leaf spotting, and there are two different diseases that can cause this. The most common is a fungal disease called septoria leaf spot, and it usually starts at the bottom of the plant and tends to work up. As the disease gets worse, a lot of times you result in this kind of defoliate or death of the leaves and then possible defoliation. If it's severe enough, it does reduce yields, so it could be a concern. I would say this year we haven't seen as much of it, and certainly some tomato plants are going to be more susceptible than others.
Now, how would a person either prevent this or take care of this once it's started?
Once it's started, you may want to turn to fungicides for control, and also removing leaves that look this bad, because this is where the source of the fungus is that's going to cause more disease later in the season. At the end of the year, also, or after you've harvested the tomatoes, if you remove the plants and compost them, or at least get the leaves away from that area rather than leaving them there in the soil, that'll be better for next year.
Okay. So what are some of the other things that might affect a tomato then?
Well, probably one of the most common things are some of the fruit problems, and that's what people get most concerned about because that's what they're after, of course. The most common one we see is blossom end rot, and that's what I have here in this plant. You can really identify it. This is called the blossom end. A lot of people don't really know that. And when it starts, often it kind of is a little brown spot, turns leathery, and in severe cases, it can get as bad as this one we see here.
Now, what exactly causes blossom end rot?
If you read any sort of tomato manuals, they usually say it's a calcium deficiency, which is true, but usually calcium isn't the problem in terms of what's available to the plant. It's usually caused by a number of factors, not a disease, but rather water fluctuations and other problems like high winds and other things that cause the calcium levels to fluctuate also in the plant.
And so there are actually several factors that can cause this.
Yes.
Now, if it is a water problem, are there some things that people can do to maybe reduce the possibility of blossom end rot?
One of the things you can try to do is keep it in an area it's not going to keep drying out, if you can do that in Oklahoma, especially if it's in pots and anywhere that you can move. The other thing to do is try to prevent lots of water and then little water, so consistent watering is very important.
So most likely a mulch around the base of the plant would help a lot with this
That
problem.
would certainly help to prevent water fluctuations.
Okay. Now, you've got also another problem on the fruit.
Right. There are other problems that can arise. One we have here today is called zippering, and let me just set this down. What you find is it sort of looks like a zipper in a way across from the blossom end to the stem end, and it is sometimes you can also get that little hole in the middle. It's really not a problem for the fruit. If it gets bad enough, I guess it can really look pretty awful when the fruit is full-sized, but it doesn't really damage the fruit that much for home gardens.
Okay. Now, what exactly causes this to appear on the fruit?
It's a problem with pollination. It's not complete, and that's why you get a zippering effect.
Okay. So basically, it would look bad, but you still eat this fruit. It would be no problem. Great. Now, there are also some other, I know cat facing is a common problem, and what does it look like?
It looks usually at the blossom end, it'll look all kind of holes and big gaps, and sometimes they can be openings that can start diseases, especially if you also get growth cracks forming in the fruit as well. So there's a lot of other disorders that are caused by environmental factors, not diseases.
So on the cat facing, what would a person do to prevent it?
Not very much. You can do it's always after the fact that you notice it. Sometimes cold temperatures can induce it and some other problems.
So if the temperatures start to warm up, it would probably go away for successive fruit then on that plant?
Possibly, yeah.
Okay. So also, there are also a lot of wilt diseases that happen to tomatoes.
And we have an example of a plant here that is exhibiting wilting symptoms. Part of this is probably just lack of water because it's been in my lab for a little bit, but it was apparently doing this in the person's garden where they were seeing wilting and they were worried about a wilt disease. And wilt diseases mean that the fungus or bacterium that's causing the disease is in the vascular tissue, which transports water. When that happens, then you're getting wilting because not enough water's moving up. This is pretty well not a disease, just looking at it, because it's still green, and that's pretty rare with the diseases we're used to seeing on tomatoes. With fusarium wilt, you usually get half of the plant or half of leaves starting to turn yellow and brown. With bacterial wilt, which is really not very common in our state, you'll often also get some browning of the plant before it starts to wilt. This could be an indication of just not enough water. It could also be, what it turned out to be in this case, damage to the stem. And it's not a disease problem again. What we're finding is that something right at the soil line has eaten away a lot of the outer part of the plant, which is where the vascular tissues are. So it's just not moving water from the roots up. There also could have been root damage. In this case, it wasn't true, but nematodes would be something also to look for if it's stunted and not really growing very well.
Okay. Now, as far as looking for wilt disease, if the whole plant starts to wilt, the first thing for a person to do would be to inspect the stem and see if there's damage to that first.
If the problem is it's destructive sampling when you try to look for diseases that are wilt diseases, what you sometimes can do, if it gets bad enough in the plant you think isn't going to recover, is to start investigating and start opening up the stem, looking for discoloration in the stem, and then going to reference books and looking at what the symptoms can be.
Okay. Now, if it is a wilt disease, is there anything that a person can do to save that tomato, or should they get that out so it doesn't affect others?
If we're pretty sure it's a wilt disease, they should remove the plant and probably a little bit of the soil around the root system, because that's where a lot of the pathogens are. So by removing that, you're hoping to remove a lot of the pathogen as well.
Okay. Well, Betsy, we really appreciate you bringing these samples in and telling us some of the things that we might be watching for on our tomatoes this summer.
You're welcome.
Remember, send us your tomato growing tips and we'll share them on Oklahoma Gardening.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.